Okay, so we are going to do this video on the Assyrian Kings List, otherwise known as AKL, the Assyrian Kings List. And this is from Appendix C from my book, Ancient History Refined. I think you'll find some nuances here that will be, eye-opening. So let's get started on this. I'm going to let Word read aloud, narrate this, and I'll stop it every once in a while with some of the graphics and chime in there. All right, so let's get going here.
Appendix C. The Assyrian Kings List, AKL. This appendix presents a model of the Assyrian Kings List based on anchor points from the Walling Biblical Timeline, WBT, which includes all creation science, biblical history, archaeology, Egyptology, astrology, and more. We must start with the Egyptian timeline, which is grounded in the C14-2 step dating method. Once we reestablish the Egyptian timeline based on the C14-3 step dating method, we can use certain interfaces between the biblical, Egyptian, and Assyrian timelines for anchor points. To bring all creationist research into one accord, we must regard the protocols and guidelines in the historical sciences instead of ignoring them when they do not fit our model. There are many authors today postulating biblical models that write off well-established historical sciences by shifting periods within the basic historical chronologies, ESP the Egyptian chronologies, to align with their models. They rearrange periods to fit them into later or earlier times based on dubious patterns of evidence that coincidentally support their model. This practice, prevalent in contemporary creationist literature, often disregards the boundaries of other well-established sciences, such as archaeology, typology datum lines, C14 dating, both two-step and three-step methods, linguistic morphology, Egyptology, astrology, dendrochronology, and the magnetosphere life cycle, thereby undermining their hypotheses and models. The proof of concept presented in Ancient History Refined shows the synchronizations and patterns of evidence that have come out of the exhaustive research behind the Walling Biblical Timeline based on Paul's time segments found in Acts 13 verses 17 to 22 and the Egyptian chronologies adjusted by the Carbon 14 three-step dating method. This synchronization comes from two areas of interest. A timeline based on the time segments given by Paul in Acts 13 verses 17 to 22 based on the original KJV interpretation, which turned out to have a natural alignment with many other biblical references, archaeology, astrology, and ancient historian accounts that the timelines from 1 Kings 6 verse 1 and X 111 do not have. The creation science of the magnetosphere and its effect on C14 dating going back in time, the BNH theory, leading to a homogeneous shift to the Egyptological records that produce time segments that precisely aligned with the Acts 13 verses 17 to 22 timeline, Ref App, A and B of Ancient History Refined. This homogeneous shift to Egyptian records maintains the scientific integrity of C14 dating, linguistic morphology, astrology, and Egyptology. It brings them into synchronization with points in time from sources such as astrology, AST, archaeology, arc, and the biblical chronologies per Acts 13 verses 17 to 22, WBT. These days, many different models propose arbitrary shifts in blocks of time, ultimately cutting across other well-established sciences such as typology datum lines, C14 dating, linguistic morphology, Egyptology, etc. The authors of these models do this without showing the rationale for accepting the implied assumptions that these sciences are either irrelevant or in error, giving them the liberty to reassign the timelines. C14 dating two-step dating method. The secular use of the C14 two-step dating method is reasonably accurate back to about 1 BC. After that, C14 two-step dating starts to get offset from the biblical timeline and archaeology in ever-increasing time spans along an exponential curve. The C14 three-step dating method discussed in Appendix A and B of Ancient History Refined analyzes that phenomenon, resolves the conflict based on creation science, the BNH theory. Regarding the effects of the magnetosphere on the generation of the C14 isotope in the upper atmosphere, and then brings the C14 dating into a very accurate quantitative measure based on high-density modeling, HDM, of the datasets going back to about 1800 BC. This model has proof of concept in the matching patterns of evidence and synchronizations with the biblical, astrological, archaeological, and Egyptian records. The C14 three-step dating method, Table C.1, below, from Appendix A and B of Ancient History Refined presents the charted results of the study that led to the development of C14 three-step dating method. This table should be used to adjust all secular historical Middle Chronicle dates anchored in C14 two-step dating or Egyptian chronology between 1800 BC and 1000 BC. This adjustment aims to harmonize these records with biblical chronologies based on the WBT developed from the original KJV Acts 13 verses 17 to 22 time segments, ensuring a synchronized timeline. In his book Origin and Destiny of the Earth's Magnetic Field, Dr. Barnes proposed a theory regarding the origin and exponential decay of Earth's magnetic field. His theory aligns with fundamental principles of electrical current resistance and entropy, consistent with Sir Horace Lamb's formula for free electric current circulating within a conducting sphere. It also incorporates evaluations of magnetic strength and direction first measured by Carl Friedrich Gauss in 1835. In 1984, Dr. Humphreys took Dr. Barnes's theory, hence the term BNH theory, on the exponential decay factors of the strength of the Earth's magnetic field when extrapolated backward and produced a model for the life cycle of the Earth's magnetosphere, MP. This model was based on the age of the universe, 6Q, as given in the Bible, Orig, KJV, the planetary masses, the atomic spins of H20, and a specific K factor for the percent spins of H20 molecule. K equals 0.25 in almost all cases, to apply to the Earth and other celestial bodies in the solar system. He then modeled several planetary magnetic fields such as the Sun, Earth, Moon, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. Figure C.
All right, at this point, we have a graphic. Let me kind of describe this graphic to you here. I've got to open up another document here for future reference here. But all right, so this is the exponential curve of the magnetic moment through time. We were talking about, figure C1, plotted graph from the B&H theory of the strength of the magnetosphere as you go back in time to 4000 BC, which is 6,000 years in 100-year increments. So this is showing you each 100 years here. So that'd be, starting at 2020, and then your 100 years all the way back to 6,000 years. And this is the strength of the magnetosphere in obviously increments related to joules per Tesla. So you can see how it's kind of not very increased very much for the first 20 to 2,000 years, but then after that you're starting to get it on an exponential curve. You can see the difference, quite a difference. And in here, when the definitions here, your upper atmosphere and age, okay. And then what you do is you would take a look at like 4,000 years ago, 200 BC, you come up here and you come across. Well, let's see which one I actually use, 0.43. All right, and then you come across here, and that gives you the strength of the magnetosphere at that time. So that would be at 2300 BC, it would equal 6 times 10 to the 23rd power joules per Tesla. Okay. So that's what you're looking at, how the magnetosphere was stronger back in the past. Okay. All right. So let's continue on from here.
Dr. Humphrey's model is 100% accurate in calculating the magnetic moment, mm, of all the planets in the solar system to within greater than 95% when compared to the actual measured mm. Anything plus or minus 5% delta is good science for a dynamic medium. The B&H theory calculations for the Earth's at creation and a time after creation, 100% accurate 100% of the time in all planets.
Okay, so here what I'm going to show you is the Earth's magnetic moment, and the formulas and the calculations that are based on the B&H theory. And so this first graphic here is the Earth's magnetic moment at creation. So here we can actually calculate the strength of the magnetosphere at the time of creation. And this is all based on basic physics, based on the size of the Earth, the size of the core, and all that. And the magnetic moment of an ortho molecule, in this case, it would be in regards to the H2O. So here are your variables. Your micro W is your magnetic moment of an ortho molecule. There is the calculation for that, joules per Tesla. And there's the mass of the planet, kilograms. There is the mass of water molecules in kilograms, and that's the value for that. Fraction of aligned molecules, 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. That's your K factor, which in most cases is going to be 1/4 for our planets and moons and suns in our solar system. And then you have the final result here is the planet's magnetic moment at creation. Okay. And this is the taking the variables and doing the calculation. Okay. So there's another calculation here that you can do an alternate one, but you can see that comes out very close to the same. So, all right. So this is the Earth's magnetic moment at creation. And then you want to know what it is down through time. And let's take a time, 1835, when we first took the measurements of the magnetosphere, the strength of the magnetosphere. And at that time, we got an 8.552 times 10 to the 22nd power, joules per Tesla. And then we did this calculation here. And here's the variables for this calculation. Your micro O, magnetic permeability. There is the calculation for that, Henry per meter. And here's your planetary core radius in meters, pi, of course. And then your cube uniform electrical conductivity. There is the formula for that. There is your time it takes for any given field to decay 36.8% of any given value. There's two values to determine that, depending on what you have for variables. Time after creation, and we said that we're going to do this based on 1835, based on 403 BC creation, and that brings us to 5,838 years after creation. All right, and then the planet's magnetic moment at a time after creation, which is your MC, which is this value of the value at the time of creation that we calculated, and times all these other variables as needed, and we came up with an 8552 that was the measured, and so we came up to the calculated at 8.45 times 10 to the 22nd power joules per Tesla. And then when you do the ratio, the calculated to the measured, you come up with 98.83% ratio in comparison. That, which is good science. This is great. As long as it's within plus or minus 5%, that's where good science comes from. And then you can see in this case, it's less than 2%. So this is a very accurate. And now what we're going to look at here next is going to be a chart showing measurements compared to the calculation down through time. And as you'll notice, all of them are within 2%. That is incredible. So we started out here. This is the Earth's magnetic moment, and it has decayed 9.1% over the past 185 years, with the calculated to measure radial less than 2% delta, 2% difference. So when you compare these two here, this one is 99.26 of the calculated to the measured, 99.42 from the calculated to the measured. Down here is, you can see it crosses to that, and this is what you want to see. You'll see it's a dynamic medium, so it's going back and forth, kind of a little cosine curve, and it is following along the calculated route. And as things go in this type of science, you should see the measure go up and below within, staying within 5% of that, the calculated to the measure. So this is really, a good control for all our calculations and for the other planets. All right, and then down here, you'll see some of the quick snapshot of where we calculated for Venus, Mercury, Mars, Earth's moon, and Jupiter's moon, Ganymede. For instance, Venus. So we said the Earth has decayed 9.1 in the last 185 years. So we try to compare the rest of them in the last 185 years. The Venus has decayed over 30% in the past 185 years, with a ratio of less than 5% delta. Mercury has decayed 21% in the past 185 years, calculated a measure ratio less than 4% delta. Mars decayed 29% with less than 1% delta. Earth's moon, greater than 40% in the past 185 years, with a calculated measure ratio less than 3% delta. And then Ganymede has decayed 16% and less than 1%. So where we're getting these results from is that each one of these planets, we actually have at some point in time, sometimes several points in time, gotten measurements of the magnetospheres of those planets. And when we did the calculations according to the B&H theory, they came within the 5% for good science. So the different planets, different sizes, different makeup, and the B&H theory, Humphrey's calculations are spot on. It is a very reliable, we now can conclude that is a very reliable calculation, very reliable science, okay?
Earth's magnetic moment, MM, has decayed 9.1% over the past 185 years with a calc/Mies ratio less than 2% delta. Figure C.5, the calculated to the measured, calc/Mies ratio, 2% delta, decay of the Earth's the last 185 years. MCal equals calculated MEA equals measured Figure C.6, the calculated to the measured, cal/Mies, ratios for some planets and moons. As previously discussed, the B&H theory has proven to be 100% accurate in calculating the measured values for the existence, strength, and decay rate of the magnetosphere, MP, around large astrological bodies, the Sun, planets, moons, planetesimals, etc. Dr. Humphrey also made predictions regarding the effect of the strength of the MP on the C14/C12 ratios and its influence on C14 dating going back in time. The theory advocated that the further back in time, the stronger the MP's Gauss strength about the Earth. This increased strength provided greater protection from cosmic rays entering the atmosphere, resulting in a lower percentage of C14 in the C14/C12 ratios. These ratios, used to date ancient artifacts such as cloths, seeds, and wood, related to a particular person, place, or thing, would yield a false, older, date based on the current two-step C14 dating method. Figure C.7, the increasing in the upper atmosphere going back in time maintained a steady, cohesive relationship with the decline of C14 generation.
So as we can see here, this is per year as you go back in time, and this is towards 4,000 years ago. And that's about a little bit after that, 4,300 years ago is when the flood occurred. This is your strength, the magnetic moment as you go back in time. And this red line here is your magnetic moment in the upper atmosphere, and this green line is your C14 generation. And as you notice, as further back in time you go, the less that the C14 was generated in the upper atmosphere. Okay.
The stronger the going back in time, the less C14 was generated, leading to a deficiency in the C14/C12 ratios that is mistaken for years dead in tested phyla. Many archaeologists and Bible scholars reject the C14 dating for events earlier than 1000 BC due to irreconcilable gaps between the two for any specific event or subject matter. As we will see in the following few segments, applying the Barnes and Humphreys theory, the BNH theory, pertaining to the effect that the strength of the magnetosphere about the Earth has on the C14/C12 ratios has resulted in an amazing reconciliation between the Walling Biblical Timeline, WBT, and ancient historical chronologies, especially Egyptology. The BNH theory advocated that the effect would inflate the age to a significant margin of error at a calculable rate for dates earlier than 1 BC, would be inflated beyond a calculable rate before the time the ice caps and volcanic aerosols dissipated from the environment, 1800 BC, be along an exponential curve. Secular scientists ignore the BNH theory because it is based on a 6,000-year-old creation. However, it is 100% accurate when comparing the calculated cal to the measured mea, magnetic moment, values, with cal /mea being within plus or minus 5%. Secular scientists are not considering the empirical evidence that shows that the strength of the Earth's magnetosphere, MP, has declined significantly in the past couple of centuries, according to both the actual measured and calculated and, therefore, should be considering the probability that its decline has been steady for several millennia. This decline would have had a substantial impact on the carbon, 14, C14, to carbon, 12, C12, ratios, which are essential for accurately dating organic matter through carbon dating. In earlier periods, the Earth's magnetic field, measured in Gauss strength, was much stronger, offering greater protection from cosmic rays. These cosmic rays interact with nitrogen atoms to produce C14, so the stronger magnetic forces in the past would have reduced the production of C14, thereby influencing the ratios used in carbon dating. Specifically, the cosmic rays bombard the atmosphere, causing neutrons to strike nitrogen, 14 N14, atoms. This interaction ejects a proton and replaces it with a neutron, converting N14 into C14. As a result, stronger magnetic forces would have reduced the production of C14 by shielding the Earth from these cosmic rays. At this point, vegetation takes in the C14 and C12 isotopes via photosynthesis at equal amounts of carbon, 14 and carbon, 12 in the atmosphere. The greater the protection, the less C14 buildup in the phylum, plants and animals of the time. In other words, much less C14 percentage in the C14/C12 ratios to start with at that earlier time. This deficiency in the C14/C12 ratio can easily be mistaken as decay when, in truth, it was not there to begin with. Secular scientists examine the paleomagnetic signatures in ancient ferromagnetic materials and claim that they are fixed when ferromagnetic materials such as magnetite cool below the Curie point, about 1000 degrees Fahrenheit, freezing the magnetic moment of the material in the direction of the local magnetic field at that time. As the science goes, the magnitude of the measured at the time of capture in the paleomagnetic materials would be much less than the actual source magnitude, as there is always an energy loss in the transfer. Additionally, magnetism in metal objects weakens over time due to entropy, that is, natural thermal collisions of the atoms returning the material to its neutral state. Also, magnetic particles being knocked around, such as in earthquakes, volcanoes and storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, thunderstorms, etc., will accelerate the process. Over a longer period of time, Random temperature fluctuations, stray magnetic fields, and mechanical movement will cause magnetic properties to decay. When rainfall exceeds a certain threshold, waterlogging occurs and can deplete magnetic minerals through processes such as glaying. Based on these paleomagnetic signatures for the past several millennia, the secularists theorize that the strength of the MP has been in equilibrium for millions of years and has fluctuated within a range as recorded in the of the paleomagnetic data, disregarding the fact that the ferromagnetic materials are affected by all the deleterious influences that they're exposed to in an open system, as opposed to lab testing in a closed system, and opposing the B&H theory that is 100% accurate 100% of the time in all the planetary MP measurements. The paleomagnetic signatures in figure C.8 below show the fluctuation in ancient ferromagnetic materials from the Wadi Fainan region, Jordan, as opposed to lab testing in a closed system, and opposing the B&H theory that is 100% accurate 100% of the time in all the planetary MP measurements. For the past 3,000 years, it shows a steady rise in intensity that parallels the rise in both the calculated and measured of the MP. After that, the environmental effects and impacts caused significant decay of the over time. Figure C.8 graph of archaeointensity of samples from the Wadi Fainan region, Jordan. A. Comparison between the results from the paleointensity analyses from this study, archaeointensity samples represented as red stars, and the data from previous studies available in the Geomagia 50, Ref. 34, gray crosses for the data that are not deemed robust, expressed as VDM in ZAM2 equals 1021 AM2. The blue and orange curves are the two synthetic PSV curves from calories 10K.2 and HFEM 10K global models 35, respectively. And the black and red curves represent the two PSV curves from SHA DF.14K 36 and Shock 2K 26, 37, respectively, calculated at the coordinates of the study area. B. Location of archaeointensity data from literature used in A. Inset. Location of the four archaeological excavations of the study, the Wadi Fainan region, Jordan. Figure C.9 shows a plot of the increasing, the C14 gen decreasing, the archaeomagnetic signature, and the present as a baseline. Figure C.9 shows the calculated red line, compared to the decreasing C14 generation, purple line, as you go back in time. Also shown is the decaying blue line, in the paleomagnetic materials after 1000 BC and its fluctuations compared to today's orange line, as a baseline. Table C.1, BC dates. WBD percent offset secular date. Figure C.10 C14 offset from benchmark points where the WBT and archaeology, ARC, are in a natural synchronization. Figure C.10 is a diagram showing the office of C14 two-step dates compared to the Walling Biblical Timeline and Archaeology, WBT and ARC. Point 1 is near 1512 BC WBT, in sync with the Ark Fall of Jericho, where the C14 date is offset to about 81 years, 1593 BC. Point 2 is near 1552 BC WBT, in sync with the Ark End of Avarice, the Exodus, where the C14 date is offset to about 109 years, 1661 BC. Point 6 is near 1777 BC WBT, in sync with the Ark Start of Avarice, where the C14 date is offset to about 120 years, 1897 BC.
So going back to what we just previously reviewed, we concluded that carbon-14 dates are offset from the true dates because of the protection of the magnetosphere, reducing the generation of carbon-14. So what we're showing here is where the Walling Biblical Timeline, the WBT, and the archaeology, ARC, Walling Biblical Timeline and ARC, are in natural synchronization. So there's 3 points that I'm going to point out. that they are the biblical date for those based on the Bible in the Acts um, passages compared to the archaeological dates based on datum lines are the same, or near the same, close enough. So from there, since we've got these anchor points between the Wallen biblical timeline and archaeology, we did a uh, line there between these 3 points, which came out to be 6 points if you go every 100 years, I believe. So what we got here is point 1 is near 1512, which is about the same time of the fall of Jericho due to archaeological typology datum lines. So they validate each other. There's two separate timelines that are equal to each other within close margin of error. And then we have measurements, carbon 14 dating of this fall of Jericho, which came to a average date of about 1593 BC. So it's offset here by that amount. Okay, so this would be about 1512, and then this comes up to 1593. So that's a difference. And then we can come all the way down here to 0.6, which is near 1777. All right, so you can see that here. And then the offset of the carbon 14 is 120 years, 1897. Okay, so 1897, and then this is 17. We're not quite showing it equally here. Oh, yes, we are. I was going to mix in that. No, that should be, yes, 1777. Okay, so anyway, and these comes from this chart that we had developed for our carbon 14 3-step dating method. Is that you would have your secular dates, which is based on carbon 14 2-step dating, and then and then calculating for the offset. What we found, we did from the 0.1 to 0.6, we did a best fit curve in there because it is along a slight curve. It's not, and you can tell that because you start off with about 80.80 81 years here, and then 120 years here. So it's a slight curve off the biblical timeline. But this is how you do your conversion from 1000 BC to 1800 BC. We show the percent difference offset that carbon 14 is off because of the strength of the magnetosphere as you go back in time. And then the date, the actual date, well, this is a secular date. So this is what, if you get, like, for instance, here you get a 1747 date, let's say, from carbon 14 dating of that particular person, place, or thing of time. You would adjust it 2.65%, and this would be the actual real date of that because of the offset of the carbon 14 dating. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start it from here because we want to go over this and make sure we are on the same page, that everybody understands what's these charts are and how that this is.
Figure C point 10C 14 offset from benchmark points where the WBT and archaeology ARC are in a natural synchronization. Figure C point 10 is a diagram showing the office of C14 two-step dates compared to the Walling biblical timeline and archaeology, WBT and ARC. Point 1 is near 1512 BC WBT, in sync with the ARC fall of Jericho, where the C14 date is offset to about 81 years, 1593 BC. Point 2 is near 1552 BC WBT, in sync with the arc end of Avarice, the Exodus, where the C14 date is offset to about 109 years, 1661 BC. Point 6 is near 1777 BC WBT, in sync with the arc start of Avarice, where the C14 date is offset to about 120 years, 1897 BC. Creation science anchor point, 6,000-year-old creation. The magnetosphere, MP, historical data confirms that the Earth is 6,000 years old. This science is an absolute dating method and validates the Masoretic timeline, or KJV, and the WBT ref Ancient History Refined, app. The mitochondrial clock confirms the Earth's age at 6,000 years old. This is an absolute dating method that validates the Masoretic timeline, or KJV, and the WBT ref Ancient History Refined, CHPT7. Egyptian chronologies are grounded in C14 dating. From the mid-1980s to the late 1990s, the alignment of carbon-14 testing with a specific astronomical event, the Sothis Heliacal rising date of 1872 BC, established that event as an absolute anchor point. From this anchor point, the pharaonic rain dates were calculated, and a C14 date was chosen to correct any dates that creeped out of sync with them. Many scholars doubt the accuracy of the Sothic cycle dating altogether, leaving the C14 dating as a reference, anchor point in 1872 BC, that does not align with any other solid dating method. As a result, Egyptology is currently rooted in C14 dating, which is offset from biblical chronologies and the archaeology, ARC, anchor point dates by about 100 years on average for the Middle Kingdom. Astronomical synchronisms, the best known of these is the Sothic cycle, and careful study of this led Richard A. Parker to argue that the dates of the 12th dynasty could be fixed with absolute precision. More recent research has eroded this confidence, questioning many of the assumptions used with the Sothic cycle, and as a result, experts have moved away from relying on the cycle. For example, Donald B. Redford, in attempting to fix the date of the end of the 18th dynasty, almost completely ignores the Sothic evidence, relying on synchronicities between Egypt and Assyria by way of the Hittites, and help from astronomical observations. Egyptological dates are offset from the biblical, WBT, and archaeological, ARC, timelines because they are grounded in C14 two-step HDM dating methods. Even though their dating is offset in an ever-increasing time span along an exponential curve as you go back in time from 1 BC, its sequencing in the Middle and New Kingdom periods is well established by cross-referencing Kings Lists, C14 two-step HDM dating, and linguistic morphology. Of note, because Egyptological dates are grounded in the C14 two-step dating method, they will be offset from the archaeological dates based on typology datum lines and biblical dates, i.e. the WBT based on Acts 13 verses 17 to 22 as translated in the original KJV, in ever-increasing time spans along an exponential curve from 1000 BC back to 1800 BC. Continuing back, prior to 1800 BC, they become extremely offset beyond calculable measures. For this reason, you cannot do a direct match from any biblical or archaeological date to the Egyptian chronology dates after 1000 BC. You must refer to the C14 three-step dating method to adjust the Egyptian chronologies between 1000 BC to 1800 BC. Figures C.11 and C.12 show the correspondence between the C14 HDM/HPD average dates and the Egyptian pharaonic rain dates. For the most part, the Egyptological dating sequence is grounded in AC14, dated anchor point or two within a dynasty, and then calculated based on each pharaoh's length of reign. Margin of error. Given that most periods mentioned in the Bible provide only year ranges without specifying partial years, months, or days, and that sometimes spans, such as Joshua's and Samuel's eras, are estimates, as well as Paul's use of the phrase. About 450 years, the Walling Biblical Timeline, WBT, incorporates a margin of error, or biblical time range, BTR, of plus or minus 0.5% for the dates along the timeline. Egyptologists have varying Egyptian chronology time ranges, ECDAR, which should also be given a margin of error, MO, of plus or minus 0.5%. For example, Wikipedia gives Senusret to a reign from 1897 to 1878, UCL from 1882 to 1872, Shah from 1877 to 1862, and C 14.2 step dating 1874 to 1859. If the BTR overlaps the ECDAR after the C 14.3 step adjustment, then the alignment is within an acceptable MO. Example, Senusret II, 12th dynasty, reigned 15 years from 1781 to 1766 BC WBT, aligns with Joseph being elevated to co-regent in 1777 BC WBT. BTR from 1796 BC to 1758 BC, ESEAT Armo from 1798 BC to 1728 BC. CTL4 and TL5 in the Figure C.11 diagram. Figure C.11 conversion table showing ascension dates from Ahmose to Ramesses II aligning with C14 dates. Difference in time, delta T, from Ahmose to Ramesses II. WBT delta T equals 252 years. Hornung delta T equals 260 years. Shah delta T equals 271 years. Grounded in C14 two-step dating. C14 delta T equals 272 years.
All right, so we have this table here, and this here is going to show us several things here. So we have from Dynasty 18, Hamas from the New Kingdom, and then down to Ramses II from Dynasty 19. All right, and all the I don't know if we're showing all of the pharaohs here, but showing the most relevant ones. And then we have interjected also the biblical characters in those times. So what we have over here is your HPD, 65% HPD, high prosperity density range, and your 95 HPD range. Like in this case here, it's from, this is carbon 14 dating. They came up with a range of 1562 to 1552, and then for the 95% of 1570 to 1544. And then I averaged those. This came out to an average of 1559, and this came out to an average of 1557. And then I averaged those two and came up with a specific date based on carbon 14 high density modeling, 1558 average date. Well, Shaw gives this same pharaoh the ascension date, 1550. So it's about 8 years off, not bad margin of error. Haran gives it a 1539, which is well below that. Now, this is the inflated date based on this right here and the difference between the wall and biblical timeline. So we went to our chart and we found out that at this time it's out by 2.2% inflated. If we apply that to this date, we come up with this date. So his date in the wall and biblical timeline, the true date, because of the carbon 14 being offset because of the strength of the magnetosphere, we got to compensate for that. It's not the articles that they tested had not been dead that long because there was a deficiency of the carbon 14 within those carbon 14 carbon 12 ratios as compared to today. So you got to compensate for that. So this is the true date. This is the carbon 14 two-step date, and this is the carbon 14 three-step date that you would get out of going to the chart, taking that date and adjusting it. All right, and now we're looking at how the difference in time for this dead reckoning between each pharaoh. Here was 25 years between this pharaoh and this pharaoh. This one was 46, 6, 46, 37. And as you can see, compared to Shaw, how absolutely exact same. Now that's not by coincidence, not all the way down here. It's because especially Shaw is basing his dates on carbon 14 dating. So look at this: 25 years, 25 years, 46, 46, 6, 6, 46. Okay. And then we got the dates here, the dead reckoning dates between each of these dates, close. Some a little different, but then again, there's some are a little different between Shaw and Harang as well. So, but they're very close in time. So we know that we got a good sequence going here. Now down here, all right, so I took this all the way to Ramses because he's going to be important in the Assyrian Kings List. He's one of the anchor points. Actually, I would say he's the most significant anchor point in the Assyrian Kings List. So I took and showed how that in the carbon 14 dating, and you're going to see that after this, where the anchorage of that is the time of Israel in Egypt, and how perfectly matched they are with the benchmark events and sequencing according to our conversion table for the carbon 14 three-step dating. So here I just kind of took that same table and simplified it. So here you have Amos, well, in biblical timeline, his reign started at 1480. Shaw has it at 1550. Carbon 14 has it 1558. All right. And this is showing you how many samples of carbon 14. These are our anchor points. You had 25 samples here for Hatshepsut, and 24 here for Tutmosis III, and then everything else is by dead reckoning. Okay, so you look at this: 25 years here in the carbon 14 and Shaw, 46 years between Shaw and C14, 6 years between Shaw and 614. So these are definitely anchored in carbon 14 dating. That's what we got to get. That's what we got to get. We got to realize you cannot do a direct matchup between the Egyptology and the biblical or archaeological dates, because biblical and archaeological dates, if you're using Acts 13, you will have a perfect match with archaeology in this time period. But the carbon 14 and consequently Egyptological records are offset because the Egyptological records are grounded in carbon 14 two-step dating method. Carbon 14 two-step dating method is offset from the biblical and archaeological dates in an ever-increasing time span as you go back in time, because the strength of the magnetosphere protecting the Earth from cosmic rays and reducing the amount of carbon nitrogen being converted to carbon 14 as you go back in time. Okay, let's go back through this.
Figure C. Point 11 conversion table showing ascension dates from Amos to Ramesses, 2 aligning with C14 dates. Difference in time, delta T, from Amos to Ramesses 2. WBT delta T equals 252 years. Hornung delta T equals 260 years. Shaw delta T equals 271 years. Grounded in C14 two-step dating. C14 delta T equals 272 years. Figure C. Point 12 sequential order of Ian Shaw's dates compared to the C14 two-step HPD dating method.
All right, so I believe we're going to see some more graphics here. And so we'll talk about this now real quick. So this is figure C13, the alignment between the Wallen biblical timeline, archaeology dating methods, and the Egyptian chronologies based on C14 three-step dating method. All right, so we did a homogeneous adjustment to the Egyptological records based on C14 three-step dating method, which was that chart that we showed you a couple pages earlier. All right, and here we are showing those differences. So anything from 1500 BC, based on the Wallen biblical timeline, coincides with an offset of the carbon 14 date of 1581. 1500 1661. So when they dated, this is anchor point one, that when they dated this, the end of Avarice, which we know as Goshen in the Bible, they come up with articles that were dated to an average of 1661. All right, but that was based on Walling Biblical Timeline of 1550, and so forth and so on as you go back in time. These are your offsets. 1800. If you get a 1922 BC carbon 14 date, or a date in the Middle Chronicles of the Egyptian records that are based on carbon 14 two-step dating, the actual real date was 1800. Okay, this is for sure. You're going to see this here in the next few pages, how absolutely amazing synchronization and alignment of benchmark events that came out of this. I mean, just unbelievable. So what we got here, we got timeline TL1. Timeline 1 is the first occupation of Avarice from 1783 to 1550, dated by typology datum lines, archaeological dating methods. It was a total of 233 years. Next, you have TL3, which is when from the time that Israel came into Egypt, which was 1767, 215 years in Egypt, and the Exodus in 1552. Okay. Then you have TL4, which was when Joseph came into Egypt and was raised to the second ruler of the kingdom. Actually, he was the ruler of the kingdom of Egypt and Canaan. And he was there from 1777 to 1697. Okay. And when he passed away, and a couple years later, 4 or 5 years later, you had the rise of the 13th and 14th dynasties. You see, they rose at about the same time Joseph died, a couple years later. And then it was coinciding at the same time when Israel's put in bondage in Egypt. And the Bible says that there arose a Pharaoh that did not know Joseph. Well, that makes sense. All right. And you talk about coincidence. This was based on a shift. So I shifted this time here from 1804 to 1700. So this is around 1700. And in the Chronicles, the Egyptian Chronicles have this into this 12th dynasty in about 1804. But once you shift it according to carbon 14 three-step dating, it aligns perfectly the start of the 13th dynasty and Israel being put in bondage in Egypt. Isn't that a coincidence? And consequently, the start of 14th dynasty as well. But now the 13th dynasty, they were pharaohs. They were Egyptian pharaohs. The 14th dynasty was not. They were rulers of a vassal province over the Hebrew taskmasters. And they were not pharaohs. There's no cartouches associated with these rulers, and they were Semitic rulers, okay, not Egyptian. Now, here's another coincidence. From when Israel was put into bondage until the Exodus was 145 years. The time that 13th dynasty arose and it came to a devastating end under Pharaoh Menapher A's rule was 145 years. So we're getting all kinds of alignments, all kinds of coincidence. And the 14th dynasty, the rulers of the vassal province over the Hebrew taskmasters, started about the same time as the 13th dynasty, because the 13th dynasty appointed these taskmasters in Goshen, in Avarice, to rule over the Hebrews. And guess what? They too came to an end in 1550, 145 years later. So all these, the end of Avarice, dated by typology datum lines, the Exodus, dated by the biblical timeline, and the Egyptian 13th dynasty and 14th dynasty, all came to an end around 1550, 1552. So isn't that amazing? So this was something that just has never been found before. This is a first. All right, let me play from start up here.
The following evidence shows the proof of concept of this homogeneous shift to the Egyptological records with synchronizations and alignments of benchmark events and patterns of evidence between the WBT and the accolades of the pharaohs. Proof of concept 1. Synchronizations and alignments of benchmark events. Figure C. Point 13 alignment between the WBT, arc dating methods, and Egyptian chronologies based on C14 three-step dating method. Figure C. Point 13 synchronizations/alignments. Timeline 1, TL1, aligning with TL4, TL1, the first occupation of Avarice from 1783 to 1550 based on arc dating methods, aligns with TL4. Joseph's time in Egypt from 1777 to the Exodus in 1550 BC based on the WBT. TL4, 5, and 6. TL4, the passing of Joseph in 1697 based on the WBT. Aligns with the rise of the 13th and 14th dynasties based on the C14 three-step dating of the Egyptian chronologies and the point in time that the Egyptians enslaved the Jews. TL1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All these timelines end in about 1552 BC, after approximately 145 years, 4 generations. Congruent with Israel's time in bondage and the time of the Exodus based on the WBT, arc, and the C14 three-step dating of the Egyptian chronologies. Note that the 13th dynasty were Egyptian pharaohs. However, the 14th dynasty was technically not an Egyptian dynasty, but consisted of rulers of an Egyptian vassal state or province over the Hebrew taskmasters. These rulers were not pharaohs, but Semitic leaders, as evidenced by the lack of cartouches associated with them, with possibly 1 or 2 exceptions who may have been appointed co-regents with the pharaoh. TL7, the bottom magenta timeline, shows the offset of the dates from the C14 three-step dates and the secular timeline based on the C14 two-step dating method. Figure C. Point 14 proof of concept 2a, patterns of evidence between the WBT and the accolades of the pharaohs.
All right, so we're going to show here a table comparing times and accolades and how well they are proof of concept of this adjustment. All right, so the first one we have here in 1777 BC, we have this event, this benchmark event in the Bible. All right, Joseph freed from prison to live freely in Egypt. And the accolades Goshen, or Avarice, was established by Joseph as his residence, occupied for 225 years. Now, the accolades of the pharaohs in 1783 BC, Avarice, the 12th dynasty settlement, was a 12th dynasty settlement occupied for 233 years based on archaeological dating. So this is based on the biblical time, and this was based on when Joseph came up and established Goshen. We know that Egypt came in 10 years later, so they were in Egypt. Israel was in Egypt for 215 years, but Joseph was there 10 years before it. So look at the time difference, 225 and 233, very close margin of error, 2 different dating methods. hard to, a good start. So Avarice was a province of Egypt where Hebrews were identified by Manfred Betek as inhabiting the area. Several dozen bits of evidence. So there's quite a bit of evidence that Manfred Betek brings forth on typology and iconography. And he himself, who is the archaeologist of the Avarice site, claims as well that this is the Jews inhabited this first occupation of Avarice. Then you have 1977, Joseph elevated to ruler of Egypt under Pharaoh, was put in charge of growing crops for 7 years to supply Egypt and Canaan with stores of grain, 7 years of famine. And in 1777, Senusret II, Pharaoh of Egypt, he come up under, famous for excavating channels throughout Egypt for irrigation to grow corn. So he had a mandate to grow corn for 7 years, the supplies, and that's exactly what is reflected in the accolades of the Pharaoh. Isn't that amazing? And it was this time, this date was based on carbon 14 three-step dating of this Pharaoh here, and it came up perfectly aligned with his accolades with those of Joseph's. So good start. We are seeing synchronization and some proof of concept here that is just undeniable. All right. So next we have in line 3 here, we have 1769 BC. The famine begins. Egyptians and Canaanites coming to Egypt. This is right from the Bible, lining up to purchase corn in trade for livestock, possessions, lands, and themselves. So in Sennacherib second Pharaoh of Egypt, again, 1768, the tomb painting of 12th dynasty official Numenhotep II shows Canaanites in line to trade possessions, livestock, possessions, lands, and themselves for corn due to the drought. Now, how's that? A miracle of the actual event in the accolades of the Pharaoh, Sennacherib II, Pharaoh of Egypt, because the famine started 2 or 3 years before this Pharaoh passed the torch to his son, Sennacherib II, who was got, well, we'll read that in a minute. But so anyway, perfect. Again, so far, perfectly reflected in both the Bible and the Pharaoh's accolades. It's just no, this we're only at point 3, and there's just so much more to this. So in point 4 here, 1767, Israel moves into Goshen 2 years later. You see that avarice in the Egyptian Delta due to the famine under Joseph's rule. The biblical Pharaoh of Egypt became wealthy by Joseph, taking all the riches, possessions, and lands from the Egyptian and Canaan provinces. So, under Sennacherib III, Pharaoh of Egypt, from 1766 to 1729, in about 1766, the country became centralized. The provincial centers declined in importance, and the Fayum district region around the residence of the king grew in scale and wealth. And there's more accolades than this. I just only have so much room for this stuff. So this is perfectly reflection of what the Bible says happened in the same time period, in the same sequence. That's just amazing. That is just amazing. I mean, at this point, if you're not convinced that this carbon 14 three-step dating adjustment to the Egyptian chronologies isn't validated, then I'm afraid I can't convince you because this is verbatim what we're finding there. You need to research it on your own. Their fifth point, in 1697, Joseph dies. In right about that time, about 2 or 3 years later, the 12th dynasty came to an end. And then in 1967, like I say, 2 or 3 years later, around 1695, really, the 13th and 14th dynasty arises. Both dynasties rise and reign in Egypt for the same amount of time, 145 years. Okay, and so going back to 1697, a pharaoh arises that does not know Joseph. Again, that's about, it should be really more like 1695. And Israel's put into bondage for, guess what, 145 years. So this 13th and 14th dynasty arises. The 13th dynasty puts Israel into bondage and appoints the 14th dynasty as provincial rulers over the taskmasters. So and all of these for 145 years, the 13th and 14th dynasty for 145 years, they were in bondage for 145 years, 4 generations. So this is your proof of concept, patterns of evidence between the wall and biblical timeline and the accolades of the pharaoh. And this is 6, and we still got 6 more to go. The benchmark events are right square on the money. In 1632, Moses is born. Male children killed, and Pharaoh's daughter takes up Moses as her son. That's from the Bible. In 1632, Sobek-hotep III reigned for 3 or 4 years between this 20-year period. They're not exactly sure, but it is a perfect line with what his accolades with Moses, so we know it was around this time. His daughter Fendi as co-regent, because her name was Inik Cartouche, which is unusual for the Middle Kingdom. The Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom, the only name that was Inik Cartouche was the pharaoh. Fendi is like only one of 2 daughters in all that time to have her name in a cartouche. Isn't that a kind of a coincidence that she was the mother of Moses. Her name was in a cartouche, kind of indicating she was co-regent, helping to put Moses in a place to where they would be acceptable to the Egyptians. Skeletons of babies under the house in Kahun, and the author, and he, Sobek-hotep, Pharaoh Sobek-hotep III, authors the Brooklyn Papyrus that contains a list of Hebrew slaves. So this was a time they killed these babies. They were finding at this time as well skeletons of babies under the houses of Kahun. Kahun was the place in Avaris in Goshen. All right. So again, what a coincidence. Wait a minute. Really, how much more of this do I need to show to convince you? In 1632, Moses is born. Moses' midwife was named Shiphrah. Well, Sobek-hotep III's reign for 3 or 4 years between 1642 and 1662, about the same time. Shiphrah was listed on the Brooklyn Papyrus that we talked about here. It contained a list of Hebrew slaves. So isn't that another coincidence? Even the very name of Shiphrah, who was known to the Pharaoh, because read that in the Bible. The Bible solemnly warned her that to do what he'd said, kill the babies, and she wouldn't do it. And look at that, God. I have to give the glory to God. I have to believe that God just honored her here for her faithfulness, So incredible. It's really cool stuff, man. Then you had in 1552 the 10 plagues of Egypt, Exodus 7 through 12. The biblical Pharaoh of Egypt refused to let the children of Israel go until the land of Egypt was devastated by the 10 plagues. And then in the accolades of the Pharaoh, this would be Menifer A. The Epirus Papyrus was dated to the Middle Kingdom, period, 12th to 13th dynasty, by linguistic morphology. So this Epirus Papyrus is an Egyptian hieratic papyrus poem that recorded 9 plagues that were identical to the biblical record. But, yeah, unbelievable. I mean, perfect descriptions. And it was linguistically dated to the 12th to 13th dynasty, not the New Kingdom, but the Middle Kingdom. So that verifies that this 1552 date, which is actually the end of the Middle Kingdom, okay, according to the carbon 14 3-step dating method. And it's 1661, according to the Egyptian chronologies, which are based in carbon 14 2-step dating, which are offset from the biblical timeline, from the real timeline, because of the strength of the magnetosphere as you go back in time. I got to keep emphasizing that till we can get hold of that. All right, now that's amazing. This is just incredibly amazing. Then in 1552, the 10th plague, the Bible recorded that the firstborn died of all those under the blood in Egypt, not under the blood in Egypt. This included the Pharaoh's son. So we know that the Pharaoh's son died, and that would have been Menifer A. And Pharaoh Menifer A's vizier, Ea Jr., firstborn son of his father Ea, dies at the same time as Menifer A. There's a reflection. He said the firstborn, and it said that Ea was appointed as vizier in the year 1 of Mehortep Ini due to unexpected death of the previous childless vizier Ea Jr., who was vizier Ea's eldest son and Amur's elder brother. So there's a reflection in the accolades of the pharaohs and the records of the Egyptian chronology that validate this. Number 1, he was firstborn. Number 2, he was the highest. He was the vizier, the highest official in underneath Menifer A's reign. So there you go, another nail in the coffin. 1552, the Exodus. The children of Israel departed Egypt 215 years after they came into Egypt and 145 years after being put into bondage. The Pharaoh and his army died in the Red Sea. Manasseh A rule came to a devastating end in the same year due to complete collapse of the administration of Egypt. The administration of Egypt at this time was made of firstborn sons. So if you kill the firstborn sons, you have devastated the administration of Egypt. The end of the 13th and 14th dynasty, after 145 years, end of Pharaoh A's reign, end of the first occupation of Avars, end of the Middle Kingdom. This was devastating. This was a major devastation to Egypt, and it came at the end of Pharaoh Menepher's A's that just so happened to align after we needed adjustment to the Exodus date. What do you think of that? I mean, this, you should be convinced by now. I mean, come on, just use some common sense here. At least enough to investigate it yourself and see, does your timeline have this many benchmark alignments reflecting perfectly what the Bible says? If not, then you need to question your timeline. In 1512, fall of Jericho, God brings down the walls of Jericho, and then Joshua burns the city after 40 years in the desert. The ruins of Jericho, dated by Catherine Kenyon in 1550 BC by typology datum lines. The walls were demolished and the city was burnt down. So this happened by biblical timeline in 1512. In the typology datum lines, she came up with 1550, and that has actually come into question by Bryant Wood, and in another paper I get into that issue. It's really a cool issue there. So anyway, that's evidence. That is just evidence that you need to take serious. You need to see that 12 points of it, and there's more. Read my book. There's absolutely a lot more. But here's just 12 definitive points. That's that conditional probability of all that happening, that perfect, that specific information. It's just not. It's just the conditional probability favors this outcome here. All right, so now let's keep going with our narrative.
These synchronizations / alignments of benchmark events and patterns of historical events confirm the accuracy of the WBT timeline post, 1800 BC prodigiously, based on 1. A timeline based on the time segments given by Paul in Acts 13 verses 17 to 22, which turned out to have a natural alignment with many other biblical references, archaeology, and ancient historians, and 2. The creation science of the magnetosphere and its effect on C14 dating, the B&H theory, as you go back in time, leading to a homogeneous shift to the Egyptological records, which produced time segments that precisely aligned with the Acts 13 verses 17 to 22 timeline, as revealed above. With this and other historical validations, ref the introduction and CHPT3 in my book Ancient History Refined. The WBT was established.
All right. So this is the timeline. This is an overview real quick here of the timeline, the Wallen Biblical timeline. And like I said, keep in mind that these times were validated through the process we just went through when we took an adjustment, a homogeneous adjustment of the Egyptian pharaoh accolades and chronicles, and based on the Acts 13 segmented sections that Paul gave us, and look at the alignment. Now I'm going to go through this and keep that in mind, that these dates, especially the 1552 date, is validated by archaeology, the biblical timeline from Acts 13, and the Egyptian chronicles when adjusted according to carbon 14 three-step dating method. So we start out, the pretty good date to start with is the David's data's ascension to king was in 1010. All right, that's pretty sure. Most of the scholars will agree with that. Some don't, but most do. Then you have Saul, who was 40 years earlier. Then you have the judges, according to Paul in Acts 13, King James, original King James Version, was 450 years. which brings us, excuse me, I'm sorry, to 1500 BC. 12 years earlier, Joshua started the campaigns in Palestine at 1512 BC. 40 years earlier, Israel came out of Egypt in the Exodus in 1552 BC. Israel was in Egypt for 215 years, bringing us to 1767. Jacob was born 130 years before he came into Egypt in 1897. Isaac was born 60 years earlier in 1957, and Abraham was born 100 years earlier in 2057. Okay, then you have from Abraham 70 years. These are the birth dates of when each of these were born. So Abraham was born 70 years after Terah, and then so forth, all the way back here. So actually, this was right after the flood, and then Apphexad was born actually the year of the flood, a year after the flood, 2347, and then. And that was 100 years after Shem was 100 years old at the time, and so forth with all these ages. Okay, so from Shem, from Abraham, born in 2057, and all the dates and ages of the birth ages from the Masoretic text brings us to 247 when Shem was born. Okay, and then of course from Shem was born 247. 100 years later was the flood, and then from the flood back to Adam was 1,656 years, and brings us to 403 again, using the Masoretic text for the ages. Okay, very sound. This is very sound and timetable that we just went through. How well established this area is from the time that that they went into Egypt until the time that they came well, actually, the time, they started the campaign. So once you establish this as an anchor point, it's all, you can go either way, and we have plenty of good documentation of ages and events to be able to come up with this timeline. All right, so now that we did that, and remember I was telling you about Ramses II as an anchor point. Let's go back and look at that, because that is going to be a key anchor point in doing the Assyrian Kings List. So here's the start of the New Kingdom. Okay, and this was all by dead reckoning and anchor points. Some anchor points for C14 testing and all that. So we come up with Ramses based on those two items: the carbon 14 3-step dating and the dead reckoning of the Kings List. We came up with Ramses in 2020. This actually, I think, is actually supposed to be 2022, or maybe that's when the Hittites rose up. But anyway, that's very important key date. Okay, for our anchor point. All right. Yeah, that was when so we got the right time. It's just the wrong time, the period, or actually, this may be off by 6 years. I think I corrected that after revisiting it. But anyway, we'll see. We'll see down here. Let me see. Ramses. Nope, I guess that's right. All right, I think it was. Yeah, that's right. Because it's not the start of his reign, but when he had to go to, when they did the battle for with the Hittites in up in Assyria. All right, so let's go back to that and look at our anchor points here.
The Assyrian Kings List, AKL. The Assyrian Kings List, AKL, has several anchor points derived from the Walling Biblical Timeline, WBT. In 1, the first anchor point, and King Shalmaneser v. 727 to 722, is recorded in the Bible, where he 732 to 723 was taken to Assyria in 723 BC, recorded in both the Bible, 2 KGS 17, and in the Babylonian Chronicles. Wikipedia. Kings Shalmaneser III, Tiglath-Pileser III, and Sargon II are recorded in the Bible in sync with the AKL's annals. The WBT, AKL, and the Jertu timeline, TL, all agree on the times from Assurbanipal II, 612 to 609, to Assurbanipal II, 972 to 967, making for a very solid validated starting point. And 2, King Shalmaneser I, 1216 to 1186. Shalmaneser rose up at about the time the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II, 1228 to 1161 WBT, and the Hittites were warring in Kadesh in about 1217 BC. These dates were validated by the WBT C14 three-step dating, along with the synchronizations and patterns of evidence found in the Egyptological records as previously reviewed. Figure C.19 Israeli King Jair kneeling before Assyrian King Shalmaneser III. And 3, the point in time, about 1660 BC WBT, where Babylonian King Hammurabi, 1694 to 1653 BC, took Assyria just before Ismdagan I died, 1671 to 1660. King Hammurabi's dates were validated by the C14 three-step dating, 1694 to 1653 BC, Jertu dates to 1697 to 1654 based on astronomy and the Ultilo-Chron. Gashi, 1696 to 1654. In 4, the Sodom and Gomorrah SNG event happened in 1958 BC. This event, which occurred worldwide, marked the end of the early Bronze Age, the Old Kingdom of Egypt, Dynasty 6, and the UR3 dynasty. It is also associated with the destruction of the Bab Edra site, although not the site of Sodom and Gomorrah, which, according to scripture, would have been north of the Dead Sea. The destruction was caused by meteorite showers across the globe, leading to the mistaken identification of Bab Edra as the Sodom and Gomorrah site. And 5, UR3 King Amarsin and his raids in the Levant in 1973 BC, the biblical and historical alignments. Amraphel King of Shinar / Amarsin King of Sumer, similarities between the names Amraphel / Amarsin, the titles King of Shinar / Sumer, and the congruent times of his reign in the ultralow chronologies matching with the WBT. In 6, Akkadian dynasty arose in 2194 BC and lasted over 100 years. In 7, Sciences, the magnetosphere life cycle and the mitochondrial clock, 6,000 years, contains the biblical timeline to the org KJV timeline. AHR app. A. Figure C.20 AKL from 609 to 1216 BC. Scholars consider the AKL from the time of Ashurnasirpal I, 1049 to 1031 BC, from which all the extant copies are believed to have been copied. The oldest of the surviving king lists, List A, 8th century BC, stops at Tiglath-Pileser II, 967 to 935 BC, and the youngest, List C, stops at Shalmaneser V, 727 to 722 BC. This means that there is plenty of room for error as you go back in time. Shalmaneser I, reduced by 11 years as a compromise between the Jertu and the secular time, and to compensate for the many uncertain time variances, errors, between Assurbanipal II and Shalmaneser I, 972 to 1216 BC, for best fit to the WBT between anchor points. Wikipedia. Ninurtave Feliker, most AKLs give 3 years instead of 13 years. Assurdan I, Variant 36 years, best fit in lieu of 46 years. Wikipedia. Assur-Rezaisi I, adjusted to match the Babylonian counterpart, CP, Nebuchadnezzar I, 1121 to 1100 BC, and Enlil-Nadin-Apli, 1099 to 1096 BC, in the synchronistic king list. Best fit with WBD timeline. Wikipedia. Assur-Nisirpal I, adjusted to match his Babylonian CP Cassinadin AI, 1006 to 1004, in the synchronistic king list. Best fit with WBD timeline. Wikipedia. Assur-Nerari IV, adjusted to match Babylonian CP Ninurta Uri, 987 to 985, in the synchronistic king list. Best fit with WBT timeline. Wiki. Assur-Rabi II, the Assyrian Kings List records his accession and genealogy, but provides no further information. His length of reign is a guesstimate, but is off as this is the length that is out of sync with the preceding kings and their counterparts. A 15-year reign perfectly aligns the king list with the preceding kings and their counterparts. Wikipedia. In 1, the WBT, AKL, and the Jertu timeline, TL, all agree with the times from Assur-Uballit II, 612 to 609, to Assur-Rezaisi II, 972 to 967. Jertua's reign count, RC, equals 647 years, start and count, SEC, equals 662 years, delta T 15 years, / WBT RC equals 607 years, SEC equals 607 years, delta T 0 years, / Secretary RC equals 665 years, SEC equals 664 years, delta T1 year. Jertua's AKL is not congruent with standard time sequencing. Jertua's Shalmaneser I time would be 1271. Delta T 15 years equals 1256 BC. Jertua's TL appears to have added time to sync with the Middle Chronicles anchored in C14 two-step dating. Jertu fails to see that where the light of his astronomical dates shine on the timeline, they are congruent with the ultra-low chronologies, as are the WBT dates, and that the middle chronologies are tied into C14 two-step dating, making them offset from the true dates by about 57 years by the time you get to Shalmaneser I in 1216 BC.
So, looking at this chart here, you can see there's 3 timelines down here. This is where he did his timeline, and you can see where it varies. It's like actually his timeline actually coincides with the secular dates, except for Salamangser. See, he reduced that by 12 years, down from 30. And I went with 21 because this is an anchor point for the timeline. We know his time was right in here because of Ramses, his time with Ramses, how he coordinates with Ramses II. So we know that we have this is a fixed. So when we come here and we adjusted these according to what was evidence, like these right here. We all adjusted these based on the counterparts, their Babylonian counterparts, because if you read in Wikipedia, it talks about these like Assur-Issa being having a counterpart with Nebuchadnezzar or Enlil-Nadin-Apli, but the secular dating of that is offset from that, saying they made a mistake. Well, they made a mistake with 1, 2, 3, 4 of them in a row. No, and when you reduce these other times that have options, they come in perfect alignment. So that's what I was getting at here. I show where this was this one again. We told you that one was reduced to because that's an anchor. The 1216 is a solid anchor that we had to come to. So reducing these other ones that had options to reduce them 3 to 13, 36 to 30, 46, you'll see, like, for instance, most Assyrian king lists, most of the Assyrian king lists, the ancient king lists, give 3 years in lieu of 13. So I reduced it to 3 because that was one of the options. And when we reduced these up through here, it made for a better fit for this anchor point. So, and plus everything else came back into alignment. These counterparts aligned perfectly and everything. So I had to reduce Ashurabi second from 41 years to 13 years, because that is where, yeah. So up to this point, they're all equal to 1972. Across the board. So everything this long, we are in. There's enough evidence that it's equal. Right here, let's see, Asher Rabi the second. Asher Rabi the second is right here. So the Assyrian. Let's read that. The Assyrian Kings List records his ascension and genealogy, but provides no further information. His length of reign is a guesstimate, but it is off, as this is the link that is out of sync with the preceding kings and their counterparts. A 15-year reign perfectly aligned with the kings list with the preceding kings and their counterparts. Well, I meant to say 13. I got to correct that, but that's a 13. So where this meets this coming down from their other anchor points, this was the pinch point. This is where they had to come up with, say, well, if we do dead reckoning to here, we do dead reckoning to here, that leaves 41 years. But that's because their anchor points are wrong. Their anchor points were good down up to this point, but from their anchor points from Shalmaneser first, you can see is at 1273. So when they do dead reckoning and using the bigger spans, range, that helped them to meet that time zone. Whereas my anchor point, which is much more solid, much more anchored in between the biblical and the archaeology and the Egyptian chronicles, is much more absolute. And so we did that using the lesser of the ones that allow us. Okay, so here is the Assyrian Kings List. Most of them give 3 years of 713. Why did they go to 13? Because it fit their chronology, and even though the majority said 3, so I'm in good territory here. There was a variant for Ashurdan the first, 36 years instead of 46. So I used 36, okay, instead of 46, and so forth and so on down through here. So just to let you know that this is really, this portion of it is solid. Now down here we have the reign counts. Okay, if you add all these up, and then the start count, take this date minus this date and see what you get. One is a reign count. Okay, so down here, just your toes reign count, which is from the start of these reigns to the end, comes up with 647 years. The start and end count, so the start up there of there down to here, he has 662. So these should be equal. This should equal this, and it doesn't. There's a difference of 15 years. Why is that? The wall in biblical timeline, my timelines, the reign count is 607, and the start and end count is 0, is 607. So we are perfectly correct, right on. We did our accounting correctly. Your toe did not, and then you have the secular one that actually came out with 1 year difference. So that's a good margin error. 15 years is not acceptable. So he needs to redo his stuff. If you account for those 15 years, you take the 1271, which he came up to here, 1271 for Shalmaneser, which is way off from the true date, obviously. But even then, if you subtract the 15 from there, you come up with 1256. So he was trying to, I think, the adding, kind of offsetting these dates incorrectly. He was trying to come back up as close as he could to the secular date. So you see that. So he was trying to reconcile that difference, which is cheating. He was cheating. I mean, I don't want to say anything bad about this guy. He really knows his stuff. He just got down a rabbit hole like we all do. I don't know if he ever thought anybody would account for it as close as I have, but that's what we found. Okay. Now we got the second one here, and of course, we're showing where Ramses dates are and how that the Anchor 2, where King Shalmaneser the first rose up at about the time of the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II, and the Hittites were warring in Kadesh in about 1217, making the start of his reign in about 1216 BC. So that's a solid anchor point, because we know Ramses. This is why I had to go through all that exercise at the start of this paper to show the Egyptian timeline, because this is anchored in the Egyptian timeline. This is the most important anchor that we have right here. So it's got to be right in order for the rest to be right. So as we go along, we're going to look at this timeline from 1161 to 1458, all the way up to Pulcher Asher III. Okay.
Figure C. Point 21 AKL from 1195 to 1458 BC. And 2. King Shalmaneser I, 1216 to 1195 BC WBT, rose up at about the time the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II, 1228 to 1161 BC WBT, and the Hittites were warring in Kadesh in about 1217 BC, making the start of his reign about 1216 BC. Asurabi I and Asurnadine I lengths of reign are an estimate by During, single source. Wiki. The length of Ashurabi's reign is broken off in all known copies of the Assyrian King List, and it is impossible to calculate how long it lasted. The dates used here are speculative approximations by During, 2020. Jertu needed to phase the secular chronologies into this astrological timeline for Hammurabi, so he reduced the reigns of Asurabi I and Asurnadini I from 20 years to 10 years to align with his dates. During's estimates were close to the correct time. They were reduced from 20 to 18 years for the best fit for the WBT between anchor points. Jertu reign count, RC, equals 238 years. STRT end count, SEC, equals 238 years. Delta T0 years. WBTRC equals 263 years. SEC equals 263 years. Delta T0 years. Secretary RC equals 276 years. SEC equals 277 years.
Yeah, so again, he did pretty good. This time he kept to it. The only one that was off only by 1 year, which is acceptable margin of error, is the secular dating and stuff. So the only difference that we had here between all these different timelines is right in through here, where Buteau had to reduce these two by 20 years in order to get the rain date that he was coming into the another anchor point. So he had to do that. My anchor point was just fine. This was just a best guess by Durin. But I think he did pretty good. I actually came up with 18 years for us to get to the next anchor point. All right. So now we have the next anchor point, okay, coming up. And I have that at this point in time, about 1660, which is Ismi Dagan first. And when Hammurabi came into Assyria from Babylon, the first Babylonian emperor, the point in time where the Babylonian king Hammurabi took Assyria in his 34th year as Babylonian king, just before Ismi-Dagan first died, is a solid anchor point. King Hammurabi's dates were validated by C14 three-step dating, by Guiteau's dates in astronomy, and the ultra low chronicles by Gasche. So these all three agreed together. So we know that's a very solid anchor point. Okay. So there's, as you can see from this point on down here, these are all 0. These did not really have a good count reign because these were all under Hammurabi and his son Samsu-Iluna. So I just took them out of the picture because they were NCs, while Hammurabi and Samsu-Iluna were the what do they call them? Let's see, the Lugals, the emperors. So that's why you're seeing a difference in the times. But everything else is exactly the same except for those 2 times there, as you'll see. Okay, so we're going along pretty good once we got through that first anchor point. All right.
Figure C point 22 AKL from 1434 to 1704 BC. And 3. The point in time, about 1660 BC, where Babylonian king Hammurabi, 1694 to 1653 BC, took Assyria in his 34th year as the Babylonian king, just before Ismdagan I died. 1671 to 1660 BC is a solid anchor point. King Hammurabi's dates were validated by the C14 three-step dating, 1694 to 1653 BC, Jertu dates, 1697 to 1654 BC, based on astronomy and the ultralow-chron by Gashi, 1696 to 1654. Hammurabi ruled over Assyria for 8 years, and so was listed in the WBTAKL for that 8-year time segment, along with Samsu-Iluna's reign over Assyria for 35 years. Wikipedia. 7. Kings under Hammurabi and Samsu-Iluna, the reigning Lugals in Assyria from 1660 to 1619 BC, were probably NCs paying tribute to Hammurabi, which included a Sir-Dougal to Adasi for a span of 43 years. Sarma-Adad II and Samsi-Adad II are either the same person or Sarma-Adad II, and Arisa III are misplaced. No dates associated with these 2 kings. The year reigns assigned to Sarma-Adad II, 3, and Arisa III, 13, are arbitrary as the AKL does not give them. Wikipedia. Jertu states, the 614 Assyrian eponyms between the first year of Samsi-Adad I and the first year of Tiglath-Pileser I, WBT 1704 to 1088 BC, allow us to date the reign of Samsi-Adad I, which validates the WBT-AKL timeline. The WBT reign dates from Samsi-Adad I, year 1 to 1704, to Assur-Uballit II, year 3 to 609, equals 1,095 years of total eponyms. The WBT-AKL reigns from first year of Samsi-Adad I to the first year of Tiglath-Pileser I, 1704 to 1088, equals 616 years, which has a delta T of 2 years from the eponym 614 years estimated by Jertu. The WBT-AKL reigns from Adad-Nirari II to Assur-Uballit II, 912 to 609, equals 303 years, matching Jertua's eponym count of 303 years. The Jertua's AKL reigns from first year of Samsi-Adad I to the first year of Tiglath-Pileser I, 1712 to 1115, equals 597, which has a delta T of 17 years from the 614 estimated by Jertu. The secular AKL reigns from first year of Samsi-Adad I to the first year of Tiglath-Pileser I, 1808 to 1115, equals 693 years, which has a delta T of 79 years from the eponym 614 years estimated by Jertu. Overall, the WBT is a closer match to Jertua's eponym count, 614, compared to the WBT-AKL reign count, 616, delta T of 2 years, over Jertua's delta T of 17 years. Jertu RC equals 253 years. SEC equals 245 years. Delta T 8 years. WBT RC equals 272 years. SEC equals 270 years, delta T 2 years. Secretary RC equals 308 years, SEC equals 310 years, delta T 2 years. Figure C. Point 23 Sargon Dynasty as listed in the Assyrian Kings List.
All right, so here it goes from Samsiadad the first, which was the last one on that list, back to Erasum, and really centralizing on Sargon of Akkad. So there was a little bit of historical misstep here on the Assyrian part, the Egyptian part. Let's see, where was this is from the Assyrian, the Assyrians, trying to go back beyond Samsiadad. They did not have the records there, any kind of extant records at the time, so they were just had some writings about it, so they tried to place it right after Samsiadad, but that was an error, and you'll see, because in the event of all of Mesopotamia, the Sargon dynasty was transcended all. He ruled the world. He was a world emperor at the time, and the historians have mixed it up and divided it up and say they're not the same guy. But I'm getting ready to show you they are the same person. All right, and as far as this right here is the Assyrian list, and given the dates and all that, which are way off. So Sargon, for instance, they have in 1904, but Sargon really was 2194 according to the biblical timeline. According to secular time, it was 2340. So this is the very same, and you'll see I tie it all together. The very same Sargon as in Mesopotamia, as in Egypt, as in India, and so forth, and especially Pulsar Asher, or otherwise known as Mizraim or King Minos. All right. So anyway, let's go through this. This is Erasum. That would have probably been Ham. There was Ham, son of El-Usama, and that would have been Noah, because Ham is the son of Noah. Iconium, it would be Cush, also pronounced Icushnum. So you got Ham, Cush, son of Erashum, Erasham. And then Sargon, which we know from the Bible as Nimrod, son of Ichanum, or Icushnum, Iconium. Then you have Pulsar Asher, also known as Minos, King Minos, Mizraim of Egypt, aka Asher in the Bible, son of Sargon, Nimrod, also listed in the Bible. So Asher was listed in the Bible, and Asher is listed here in the Assyrian King List as son of Sargon, which we know as Nimrod. All right, and then Naram-Sin is the son of Asher, is son of King, the grandson of Sargon, the son of Mizraim, the son of King Minos. So, and then Irasum, or Guni Iri, son of Naram-Sin. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then possibly 5 and 6 generations here that are perfectly matched to both the Mesopotamian Sargon dynasty and the Egyptian King Minos dynasty.
Figure C. Point 23 Sargon Dynasty as listed in the Assyrian Kings List. The Sargon dynasty found in all ancient cultures, Sumer, Assyria, Egypt, India, Greece, etc., are the same dynasty, even though the historians of each of these cultures date them to different periods up to greater than 1,200 years apart, i.e., Egypt 3100 BC versus Assyria 1904 BC. The Sargon of Akkad was the same person as the Sargon of Assyria, 2194 to 2139 BC. Some names from the later Sargon dynasty of Sumer are absent from the records of the Assyrian Sargon dynasty. These rulers likely governed in Assyria as well, but the scribes may not have had access to all the relevant records at the time.
So just real quick, looking up here. So we have Samsiadad, and then you have the Isin dynasty, okay, from 1950 to 1717. And these are pretty well matched with the Middle Chronicles, okay? So when I did my uh, Dead Reckoning with the biblical timeline, I started studying the Assyrian Kings List, and look, I found a perfect match. There's just no, this is outside of carbon 14 dating. They don't really establish these by carbon 14 dating or any association with Egyptology, and they've got it right. Well, at least the Middle Chronicles, for the most part. Uto got it off a little bit because he had to match it up with Samsiadad and his uh, offsets that accumulated. All right. So you had the Isin dynasty, you had the King of Isin, Isbi era, okay, which is very close to the same secular date as the Wallen biblical timeline. Sodom and Gomorrah event, which is a worldwide event, and is related to so much in history to prove that, which we go into a little bit later. Ibisin reign was the last of the year 3 emperors, and their dates are exactly the same. And that's how we found Amr Sin as being the same as the Amr. I can't remember exactly how to pronounce his name in the Bible. We matched that up. I found him, and it's perfectly everything lined up perfectly. I think I'll get into that a little bit later. And then you had Gilgamesh, which was very much part of year 3, during year 3 in Abraham's time and all that. Abraham's time was here as well. This was a perfect matchup because we tied him into the last king of the Mesopotamia, the king, the Sargon dynasty, and that's how he was a NC under Shooter Kib, the Lugal at the time, and he defeated him and became a famous king. And then this right here, from here all the way up, is all of the Sargon dynasty and their ascension, their ascending kings, children, and then of course Ikushnim and Irisham as Cush and Ham. Okay.
In the Assyrian Kings List, the Sargon dynasty placement seems to represent the best guess of the scribes who compiled it. The scribes, working in the 11th century BC, between 1049 to 1031 BC, were evidently aware of the Sargon dynasty, as it was recorded in the Bible that Nimrod, Sargon, and Assur established the cities of Assyria. So they would have to be included in the Assyrian history and kings lists at some point, prior to Samsiadab I's reign in the Assyrian kingdom. Their lack of knowledge left them void of having any solid timetable to go by over 1,000 years later, and so placed Sargon dynasty immediately prior to Samsiadab I, along with what was probably coexisting kings and the kings that lived in tents. NCs appointed by the Akkadian dynasty emperors, or the UR3 dynasty kings, or the Isin dynasty kings, the Lugals prior to Samsiadab I's reign. The WBT estimates the Assyrian Sargon dynasty existed from 2194 BC to between 2098 and 2057 BC. Based on co-regent reigns in all successions, it is likely closer to 2098 BC. Reigns between Lugalbans and UR3 coexisted with Gilgamesh and Abraham in the intermediate period, 50 years dark period, between the Sargon and UR3 empires. The end of the UR3 dynasty with Ibisin was met with a great environmental catastrophe, famine, in conjunction with the conquest of the Elamites, moved by the famine. These events align with the Amraphel, king of Shinar, attacks in the Levant, and the Sodom and Gomorrah destruction, according to the WBT, within an acceptable margin of error. This alignment would connect several ancient historical events with two significant biblical benchmarks, supported by various dating methods. Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Amarsin, king of Sumer, 1973 BC. The similarities in names, Amraphel/Amarsin, titles, King of Shinar/Sumer. And the overlapping timelines of their reigns strongly suggest that these figures could be the same individual. The fall of the UR3 dynasty, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, SMG, the end of the early Bronze Age, the start of the Egyptian First Intermediate Period between dynasties 6 and 7, and the destruction of Bab Ethra. 1958 BC. These events, occurring around 1958 BC, coincide with widespread meteorite showers and other catastrophic events globally, aligning with the biblical account of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction. Carl Schaefer, there is not the slightest doubt that the conflagration of Troy II corresponds to the catastrophe that made an end to the habitations of the early Bronze Age of Alaka-Huyuk, of Alaser of Tarsus, of Te-Pisar in Asia Minor, and to the catastrophe that burned ancient Ugarit II in Syria, the city of Byblos that flourished under the Old Kingdom in Egypt, the contemporaneous cities of Palestine, and that it was among the causes that terminated the Old Kingdom of Egypt. In the same catastrophe was destroyed the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Cyprus. The Babylonian Kings List places Gilgamesh several centuries before Sargon, an obvious error and a clear indication that the Sumerian Kings List, SKL, is not a reliable record for the pre-Sargon dynasty. The Bible records the First Empire as the Nimrod-Sargon dynasty. Therefore, there could not be any pre-dynastic kings. The main boast of Gilgamesh and Akka describes the triumph of Gilgamesh, the Ensi hero, over his overlord Akka, Lugal-Qa, Shudderkib, the last emperor of the Sargon dynasty, ruler of the city of Kish. Sargon, Nimrod, founded the Akkadian, Akkad, dynasty, so it is not possible for Gilgamesh to have been an Ensi under any pre-dynastic ruler when Kish was not even a ruling city until 360 years later, according to the list. Additionally, he met with Noah, who was already about 900 years old at the time, having the reputation of being immortal due to his great age, which would place Gilgamesh as a contemporary of Job and Abraham. A sketch of an ancient Sumerian relief shows Gilgamesh between two Minotaur, which would have been after the reign of Naram-Sin of the First Akkadian Empire. The legend of the Minotaur or Bull Man originates from stories about Naram-Sin, also known as the Bull of Minos. At the other end of Gilgamesh's reign, the kings of the UR3 dynasty referred to Gilgamesh as their divine brother and friend, implying that he was an actual living person at this time and personally known by them to be called a friend. King Shulgi of UR declared himself the son of Lugalbanda and Nin-Sun and the brother of Gilgamesh. The Deluge tablet of the Gilgamesh epic in Akkadian is believed to date to the UR3 dynasty period, with no other earlier Sumerian writings mentioning him. Figure C. Point 24 timeline for Abram, UR3 dynasty, and Gilgamesh.
So we have this spreadsheet here showing Abraham's events based on the Wallen Biblical Timeline. So all these dates will be according to the Wallen Biblical Timeline. The UR3 Kings, okay, and these are based on actual historian accounts. They got it right. They really did, I think, because of these anchor points. And then you have Gilgamesh, which we have several, like we just went over, have several clues to place him right perfectly in line here between meeting Noah, between taking Ka or Akka, which would have been the last Lugal of the Sargon dynasty. When a Lugal is a reference to the emperor, an emperor, the highest in the land, and an Ensi, it would be a ruler underneath him, like a ruler of a certain country or whatever that was paying tribute to the Lugal, the emperor. All right, so you have Abraham was born 2057, came into Canaan 1982, 75 years old, out of Ur. This is when God made that covenant with Abram. He went into Egypt also in 1982, later that year, and then came back in 76. For I think this was in regards to a famine, I believe. And then back into Canaan in 1981. All right, Lot separates from Abraham at this time. Then you have the Amraphel attacks, which is the anchor point that we're looking at. And look at the times. Looks like a good matchup between Sin and Amraphel. Names very much morphologically, similar. And then you had his name, the time, and his title, the King of Shinar, King of Sumer. And then you have Ishmael was born in 1971. He was 13 years old during the Sodom and Gomorrah event, which was a worldwide event. And then you had the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in 1958, which was 15 years from Abraham. So, yeah. And then you had where Isaac was born in 1957. You had Sodom and Gomorrah, 1958. Abraham's age was 99. Isaac was born in 1957. Abraham's age was 100. All right. And then you had your three kings, your Namu, 2047. He claimed to be Gilgamesh's friend and family. Okay. So that's personal. That's saying he knew Gilgamesh. And again, you can only date Gilgamesh back to the Ur 3 dynasty. So that makes perfect sense. They tried to list him 350 years before this, actually before before the Sargon dynasty, but there's no record of it. There is absolutely, other than the way somebody listed it years later, there's no record of it. So by all indications, he was contemporary with the Ur 3 kings and with Abram. Then you have Shogi, claimed to be Gilgamesh's brother, because they're trying to claim that Gilgamesh and Shogi were, sons of some god. So their mother was a god, I believe. And then you had Amerson, who was our anchor point here because of all of the alignments that came out of that, 3 in particular. Then you had Shushan in 1973. And then you had Ibisid in 1965 to 41. But I've got to believe that some of these were probably co-regent these times, because the 1958, which falls right in between here, is where Ur 3 came to a devastating end. So some of the kings probably reigned co-regent. All right. Then you had Gilgamesh believed that his reign started in 2098 when he defeated Ka, or Akka. Ka is the Egyptian name of the last king, the Sargon dynasty emperor. 2047, he meets Noah. And Noah would have probably been around 900 years old, having being claimed that he was immortal. Then you had 1997, Noah dies at 950 years old. And then a probable reign in for Gilgamesh after 126 years was probably around 1972 plus or minus 4 years, is the way I'm kind of figuring it. So that date of 126 years when he starts being known by the Ur 3 kings is a perfect match. It's their time span is within perfect match.
Figure C. Point 24 timeline for Abram, Ur 3 dynasty, and Gilgamesh. Figure C. Point 25 connecting King Menishtisu of Sumer to Assur of Assyria and the nations. KJV Gen 1010, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. 11 out of that land went forth Ashur, and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth, and Calah, 12 and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. The same is a great city. GNV Gen 1010, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. 11 out of that land came Ashur, and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth and Kala. 12 Rezin also between Nineveh and Kala. This is a great city. Complete Jewish Bible Gen 10:10. His kingdom began with Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. 11 Ashur went up from that land and built Nineveh, the city Rehovot, Kalach, 12 and Rezin between Nineveh and Kalach. That one is the great city.
So I just quoted several biblical sources here that shows that Asher was a person, not a place, and that the correct interpretation, we'll see a little more of that here in a minute, was that, that Sargon or uh, um, Nimrod established Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar, Sumer. But out of that land went forth Asher. Who is Asher? Well, we can tie him into the Assyrian Kings List, Bolsher Asher, and realize that's his son because Nimrod's son was his son. And plus, you'll see here, there's other references that actually tie the name Asher to Aha Minos, Aha Manje, which is both of the names, Asher and Minos, or Manja. So, anyways, here is the Kings List in Akkadian Kings List, Assyrian, Egyptian, Indian, and Greece. And you'll look at that they have the exact same kings in the lists, morphologically similar in all of these dynasties. And they want to say that each one of these dynasties separately named their kids exactly the same as their predecessors or from other countries up to 1,200 years apart. That just don't make no sense, number one. Sargon, and we know you can't go beyond 2194 anyway. All right, so they got this Sargon at 2340. They got this one at 1940. This is a low one, really. And then we have this one at 3029, and we have this 27. So these are all, with the exception of the Assyrian one, before 2194. So those aren't right. You got to condense it, and when you condense it, they all match up. They all come together. So you got Sargon. You got, well, the only exception would be Rimush in the Akkadian dynasty, because he didn't really end up being found listed in the rest of these, but he was only for 9 years. And then Pulcher Manishtushu, who is Pulcher Asher, who is Aha Minos, who is Mayan Sui, and King Minos of Greece. They're all the same person. He came into Akkad after being out at sea, I believe, for these 9 years, and took Rimush and killed him and became the emperor of the world. Then you have a real good anchor point, Naram Sin, and everyone look at the morphological similarities here. Naram Sin, Narmar, Naramara, and the Minotaur. So, which is the son of King Minos in Greece. So, and then you have their descendants that with all the very similar names, So, what are the odds? Sherab Kib, and Ka, like here in Egypt, he's also called Ka and Akka. And so he was the last emperor, very weak emperor, and ended up being conquered by Gilgamesh. Okay. And here is the Hebrew text in regards to Nimrod and Asher. And a direct translation says, out of the land went forth Asher, and he built Nineveh and the streets of the city and Caleb. So this reference to these other Bibles are incorrect, and we'll show that right now.
Wycliffe Bible Gen 10:10. Soothly, the beginning of his realm was Babylon, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. 11 Ashur went out of that land, and builded Nineveh, and the streets of the city, and Kala, 12 and Rezin betwixt Nineveh and Kala. This is a great city. Figure C.26, direct Hebrew to English translation source 1. Figure C. Point 27, direct Hebrew to English translation source 2. The translation refers to the person, Assur, rather than the geographical area, as the region was not known as Assyria until centuries later. This passage was originally written around 2000 BC under the auspices of Abraham. This translations in the NIV Bible and others that contain references to Assyria are anachronistic. These references pertain to the person Assur, the city of Assur, or the god Assur, rather than the later established region of Assyria. AI overview. Assyria is first mentioned in the Bible in Genesis 2 verse 14, which states that the Tigris River flowed east of Ashur. Some English translations render this as east of Assyria, but in the Assyrian language, the words for Assyria, Ashur, the city, and Ashur, the god, are spelled identically. It's likely the Hebrew text follows this pattern. Moreover, the Tigris River flows through the center of Assyria, not to the east of it. Bible. Ashur, in league with Nimrod, Sargon, built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, and Kala and Rezin, naming the capital after himself, Ashur. The Assyrian Kings List. Sargon, A.K. Sherajin, Assur Naram-Sin. Sumerian Kings List. Sargon, A.K. Sherajin, Manishtusu Naram-Sin. Egyptian Kings List. Sherujin, morphological rendition of Sargon, Ahamenes, Ahamanj, Tusu, morphological renditions of Ashurmanis, Narmer, morphological rendition of Naram-Sin. Indian Kings List. Sagara, morphological rendition of Sargon, Asamanja, morphological rendition of Ahamanj, Narmara, morphological rendition of Naram-Sin/Narmer. The Sumerian Great Ebony Label, seals discovered in the tombs of the first Egyptian dynasty in Abydos, Egypt, dated to 3100 BC, provide significant links between Sumer and Egypt, and between Manishtusu and Assur, Manash, Ahamenash, mix of Sumerian and Egyptian titles. The translations of these seals, all inscribed with the same Sumerian signs from the Sargon the Great period, reveal fascinating connections. Translation 1. King Manash, or King Manash of Ships, the Pharaoh of Egypt, the land of the two crowns. Translation 2. The perished dead one in the west, of the sun, hawk race, Ahamenash. Peleg, Gens 1025 and Ikron 119, and unto Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. The expression, in his days, is synonymous with in his time, which is a reference to a period in his lifetime, not his birth date, as used in this manner in many other verses in the Torah. Gen 6:4, 18:11, 24:1, X2:11, to 17:9, 19:17, 26:3, Josh 13:1, 20:6, Judge 17:6. The word days in these scriptures are always used in reference to a notable time period or event, never a birthday/date. According to the Masoretic text accounting of the descendants of Shem, there would be about 2,600 people in Sumer at Peleg's birth in 2248 BC. 2 generations later, there would be about 175,200 people in 2172 BC. This point in time would make better sense of the reference to his days, a period in his life, probably when he was the Ensi of pre-Babel at about the age of 75, rather than his birthday for Sumer, Shinar. To have enough populace at the Babel event to start colonies throughout the world and to man an army under Sargon, Nimrod, at this time. Peleg's birth name is unknown, as is pre-Babel. It appears that the change in languages at Babel resulted in the renaming of many people's names, as evidenced by the differences between the biblical names of pre-Babel characters and their historical counterparts. It stands to reason that Peleg was associated with Babel in some form for his name to be associated with the change of the name of the city, most likely the Ensi ruler of the city under the Lugal at the time, Sargon/Nimrod. All the names of clan chieftains and kings appear to have changed during the Babel event. Unknown city, Babel. Unknown name, Peleg. Nimrod Sargon. Ashur Manishtusu. Naram-Sin Minotaur. Nimrod, Sargon, established the cities in Sumer of Mesopotamia with Akkad as its capital, while his son Assur, Manishtusu, established the cities in the region that we know today as Assyria, making the city of Assur the capital, Oreg. KJV Gen 10:6-12. This event occurred before the Babel event described in Genesis 11 verses 1-9. Afterward, Nimrod was referred to as Sargon, and Assur became known as Manishtusu, with Tusu meaning warrior. The Assyrians were Semitic, descendants of Shem, as relayed in the Bible and confirmed in the Assyrian inscriptions. Assur was soon deified, depicted with wings, and worshipped in Assyria as the supreme ruler of the gods. This led to his son, Naram-Sin, also being deified, Sin, meaning a celestial god. Naram-Sin claimed to be the bull of heaven sent from the goddess Ishtar, Venus. Naram-Sin, the son of the god Assur, Manishtusu aka King Minos, was referred to as the bull of Minos or the Minotaur. There are no archaeological findings that corroborate any periods for ancient Assyrian texts or kings lists before 1900 BC. As a result, there is no reliable way to date these kings' reigns, whether through C14 dating or typology datum lines, beyond the sequential listings found in various kings lists. When these sequences are followed without corroborating evidence, many entries may be out of sync, involve co-regencies, represent parallel contemporary chieftains, or be improperly listed or even fabricated to extend the king's list, often as a result of chronology wars. The ancient Assyrian text was written in Akkadian, the lingua franca established by the Sargon-Akkadian dynasty, a language emerging from Babel out of Sumer in about 2172 BC. It is important to note that Assur, Rehoboth, was established and named after Assur, the son of Sargon, Nimrod, as documented in both the Bible and the Assyrian Kings List. Historians often overlook or dismiss this connection, relying on incomplete and sketchy ancient texts without considering the biblical account. Kuiper, in Assyria, inscriptions were composed in Akkadian from the beginning. Under UR3, Ashur was a provincial capital. The Assyrian dialect of Akkadian found at the beginning of the second millennium differs strongly from the dialect of Babylonia. These two versions of the Akkadian language continue into the first millennium. The rulers of Ashur styled themselves not king, but partly Isiakum, the Akkadian equivalent of the Sumerian word Ensi, partly Rubum, or Great One. Head of a colony, a people group out of Babel or clan leader, subject to the Akkadian emperors, the Lugal. Old Assyrian period. Damage to the tablets in all three extant king lists before Enlil Nasir II, ca 1420 to 1415 BC, short, prevents the calculation of approximate regnal dates from Orisham I to this point. Additionally, three kings attested elsewhere from this period are not included in the standard king list. The Assyrian Kings List found on the Assyrian National International News Agency website correctly reflects the Akkadian dynastic rule at the start of the Assyrian Kings List, although incorrectly dated. The list of kings who lived in tents prior to the Akkadian dynasty would be better termed as clan chieftains who lived in tents before and during Nimrod's, Sargon's, dynasty. The kings who lived in tents were clan chieftains or regional mayors or vassal lords, some who may have been appointed by the Sargon dynasty, as the population grew during the previous 175 years. From the flood in 2347 BC to the Babel event in 2172 BC, the population, 5 gens, was approximately 175.2K/71 Oreg. People groups equals 2.5K people in each ethnic group, colony on average. Notice that Pulsar I is listed in the pre-dynastic period. However, Pulsar I was an alternate name for Manishtusu, Sargon's son, who went out from Shinar, Sumer, and established the cities of Assyria, Nineveh, Rehoboth, Assur, Kala, and Rezin, as recorded in the Bible, KJV Gen 10:10-12. As a clan chieftain, he was known as a Sur, a warrior general under his father, Sargon, Nimrod, and the root of Aha and Asa, i.e., Horaha, King Ahamenes of Egypt, meaning fighting hawk. Later, after the Babel event, as an emperor of the Akkadian dynasty, he was addressed as Manishtusu, meaning Manus the warrior, as Ahamanj, Manj the warrior, aka King Minos in Greece and Egypt, and as Asa Manja, Manja the shooter. In India, most of these so-called pre-dynastic clan chieftains, kings, mayors, vassal lords, would have been contemporary with each other and the Sargon dynasty as they lived on average 450 years after the flood for several generations. The names of Arisham I and Icunum listed as kings before Sargon in the Assyrian Kings List may have been morphological derivatives of Ham, Erisham, Erisham, and Cush, Icunum, Ikush number, the dominant clan chieftains from which Sargon, Nimrod, ascended from. This case analysis regarding the clan chieftains, regional kings, mayors, or vassal lords appointed by the Sargon dynasty is true of pre-dynastic Sumer, India, and Greece, and the Second Dynasty in Egypt, rendering Petrie's sequence dating an invalid model for pre-dynastic Egypt. They were co-dynastic, not pre-dynastic. Kuiper. The Kings List gives us coming in succession several dynasties that now are known to have ruled simultaneously. It loses its value for the time before the dynasty of Akkad. The rulers of these co-dynastic cities and states in Sumer and Assyria typically referred to themselves as Ensi, a local ruler, rather than Lugal, which signifies an emperor. The title, Lugal, would have referred to the Akkadian emperor at the time. Until the UR3 period, the Ensis of a city-state operated autonomously under the overarching authority of the Lugal. They were free to fight with neighboring states for various reasons, such as territorial expansion or revenge. In some cases, these conflicts may have been coordinated with the Lugal to suppress minor uprisings within the empire. The UR3 dynasty, following on the heels of the Sargon, Akkadian, dynasty, reflected a similar pattern, following the Sargon dynasty governmental structure, except the Ensi was no longer autonomous under the rule of the Lugal, kings of UR3. There are no connections between Egypt and the periods of and prior to the UR3 and Old Babylonian period. Additionally, no reliable C14, datable artifacts are available for these periods. However, patterns of evidence between these empires/periods can be found to date them using the WBT. One such benchmark is the alignment with Amraphel, king of Shinar of the WBT, and UR3, king of Marsin, king of Sumer. Regarding pre-dynastic kings or kingdoms, the Sargon dynasty is as far back in time as one can go in archaeological excavations in all ancient cultures, Sumerian, Egyptian, Indian, Grecian, Assyrian, etc. Van de Meyrup, precise dating of archaeological sites is hindered by the fact that there are no clear distinctions between artifact assemblages thought to stem from the preceding early dynastic period and those thought to be Akkadian. These pre-dynastic kings before Sargon were actually contemporary provincial rulers who coexisted with the Sargon dynasty. These rulers, known as Ensi, Sumerian for governors or local rulers, were subordinate to the Lugal, Sumerian for king or emperor, the title held by the Sargon dynastic emperors. From Shah, archaeological excavations of cemeteries in Egypt likewise and their vertical strata chronology and become horizontal for the pre-dynastic period. To frame these sites to conform to a presupposed dogma, the dating of these supposed pre-dynastic cemetery sites was dated by a system devised by Petrie called sequence dating, and said to be confirmed by the C14 dating method, which is completely unreliable at this period and requires significant cherry-picking on the part of the archaeologist. In other words, Egyptologists cannot go any further down in the vertical strata, back in time, than Sargon's or Ahamenes' period without making up some extraordinary scheme using horizontal strata to fit secular narratives. Archaeologists do not base the identification of supposed Neolithic and pre-dynastic sites on the superposition of strata. Instead, they assess the sites by determining whether they were used by hunter-gatherers, considered earlier, or for sedentary activities like agriculture or the domestication of animals for livestock, considered more recent, regardless of the stratigraphic horizon in which they were found. Additionally, archaeologists assume that smaller population counts, indicating older periods, and larger population counts, indicating later periods, along with the progression from simpler to more complex cultures, serve as clues for determining the time periods sequence dating. C14 is, of course, being used to establish the dates as well with the acceptance or rejection of the results subject to the estimation of the archaeologist. All these assumptions are not in line with modern representations. All these different livelihood pursuits of the ancients, hunter/gatherer, sedentary activities, etc., and circumstances, population, simple, complex, are coexistent today and have been throughout all of recorded history, such as the American Indians as hunter/gatherer alongside English colonists with sedate practices, farming and husbandry, today's coexisting natives of Papua New Guinea, primitive tribes of the African Congo and American Amazons, etc., which begs the question, why would you? Assume one is older in time rather than coexisting at the same time. See 14 two-step dating, along with dendrochronology, as we have concluded elsewhere, can be offset from the actual date by hundreds to thousands of years prior to 1800 BC due to the diversity of environmental conditions and the strength of the magnetosphere as you go back in time. Kuiper. These stages of development can only rarely be dated on the basis of a sequence of levels, superposition, at one site alone. Instead, an important role is played by the comparison of different sites, starting with the assumption that what is simpler and technically less accomplished is older. In addition to this type of dating, which can be only relative, the radiocarbon or carbon 14 method has proved to be an increasingly valuable tool since the 1950s. In establishing dates of the Sumerian/Akkadian Kings List, Kuiper states, carbon 14 dates are at present too few and far between to be given undue weight prior to 1450 BC. Kuiper relays that with prehistory only approximate dates can be offered, which, unfortunately, has not yet been established for the first half of the 3rd millennium BC. Each author has their own estimates on the start of the Kings List that can range from 1530 BC to 1730 BC. Much of the dating is derived from cross-referencing later Assyrian and Babylonia dated tablets and Assyrian list of eponyms after 1450 BC. Each historian then makes assumptions from that point, which can be off by as much as 200 years from each other. Kuiper. The Kings List gives us coming in succession several dynasties that now are known to have ruled simultaneously. It loses its value for the time before the dynasty of Akkad. These pre-dynastic rulers, Ensis, ruled simultaneously with each other and the Sargon dynasty, Mughals, according to all indications. Sargon the Great, Nimrod, was the first empire and dynasty, Akkadian dynasty, to rise up in Sumer of Mesopotamia in about 2194 BC and ruled the world for about 100 years. Jeff Walling query to AI. I submitted a query to AI regarding pre-dynastic kings or kingdoms claiming that the Sargon dynasty is as far back in time as you can go in archaeological excavations in all ancient cultures, Sumerian, Egyptian, Indian, Grecian, Assyrian, etc. I challenged AI regarding archaeological dating methods and their weakness and reliability. As much as AI has a liberal bias in its responses, it agreed with me for the most part. Some of its responses almost seem to have come from my book, Ancient History Refined. Here is the response from the AI when I copied and pasted this previously reviewed discussion into the ChatGPT 4.0 online software. AI response. The discussion you've presented raises important considerations and critiques of archaeological methods, particularly in the context of dating ancient cultures and the interpretation of archaeological evidence. Let's delve into the key points. 1.
So I'm running out of time. I'm just going to go to the conclusion and see if I can get that in before I run out of time here.
Conclusion. The concerns you've raised underscore the complexity and challenges of reconstructing ancient history. While modern archaeological methods, such as C14 dating and stratigraphy, provide valuable tools for dating and understanding ancient cultures, they have limitations that must be acknowledged. Additionally, the coexistence of different cultural practices and the subjective nature of interpreting artifacts necessitate a cautious approach to drawing conclusions about the past. The debate over the existence and nature of pre-dynastic periods reflects broader questions about how we interpret evidence and construct historical narratives. As our understanding of ancient cultures continues to evolve, it is essential to critically evaluate the methods and assumptions that shape our reconstructions of history.
Very good. So that brings us to the end of this narrative. And when you get a chance to get my book, you'll have this in the response that you can read for yourself. So anyway, I hope you